we're planning on doing today is talking a little bit about the Embracing Autism Podcast, which launched today pretty much anywhere that podcasts are found. So we have it Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. I think it's on Pandora, and then it's on a bunch of smaller ones that you probably haven't heard of, like Podchaser and things like that. But you can find it pretty much anywhere at this point. And we have right now episodes 0 through 2 out, and episode 0 is really more of a background introduction episode.
Right. Just kind of how we came to start the podcast all together, and kind of our little family, and just kind of getting everyone on the same page of who we are, essentially. So,
So basically, what we're trying to do today is we're going to go over a few things. So one of it is, what are our goals with this podcast? Why did we create the podcast? And then what you can expect to find or listen about on the podcast. Right. It's more of an informational based podcast, I would say. We do put our opinions and our personal experience in it.
Right. We kind of have, we try to limit as far as any type of personal recommendations on best action. Right. I mean, obviously do what's best for you and your family. We will give some insight as to what we've done, if we've seen any success with that, and give a little bit of feedback there. But obviously, you know your kids better than we do, so don't listen
so
to
that's
us for
like
everything.
our disclaimer.
And our other disclaimer is
we are not medical
doctors,
professionals. So yeah, do not take anything that we say in this podcast as like medical advice. Everything that we say is from our perspective and things that we've experienced that have helped us. A lot of the stuff has been told to us by medical professionals, therapists, and things like that, and they have worked for us, which is why we recommend it. But we always recommend that you always go to your personal doctor, therapist first, and run it by them, because every kid is different, and what works for one kid might not work for the other. So just make sure you run any suggestions that we ever make through your doctor first.
And we are not liable for anything that you hear here.
Did I mention my sister's a lawyer? No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. So what we want to do today is we want to talk a little bit more about the background first. So Let's go ahead and just dive into like what got us interested in creating the podcast and what it's meant to do.
Sure.
Do you want to start?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest reasons that we even started the podcast, at least for me, I mean, you might have your own perspective on this one. I think it's basically just to try and assist parents and families that get the diagnosis or think that they have a child that might be autistic and not really sure where to go from there. Leah and I both kind of had the struggle as far as soon as we had gotten the diagnosis, we didn't really have much to go with or a great path set forward. So we were kind of just stumbling at first, picking up some information here and other information kind of along the way. And we were hoping for one-stop shop of all the information that we had in our mind or we'd written down or anything that we've learned to try and pass it along to the next person who might be in a similar situation.
Yeah, we found that at the very beginning. So we have 2 autistic daughters, and we go through that in the podcast. So the very first episode 0, goes through our personal story. So we go in great detail about our 2 kids, though we do make a point to make sure that our kids' names are always anonymous. So we do respect their privacy. So you'll never hear their names, but we do use stories about them. And we basically realized at the beginning of our journey that there really weren't a lot of resources out there. It's very rare to find somebody else who even has an autistic child that you can relate with. You pretty much are reliant upon the internet for any sort of like community connection.
Right. And then the internet itself is kind of a battlefield of trying to navigate what works best. Wow, get emotional. What works best in some cases, how other people feel about certain therapies. Excuse me.
You gotta get some water.
I guess so.
Should have brought some before.
All right.
See, you can tell we're inexperienced live casters because you're always supposed to have a cup of water with you, and we didn't do it. See, so that's what we get.
That's because we pressed go early.
But yeah, what he was saying is basically we realize that there aren't a lot of resources out there. And it comes, I'm sure if you are listening or you're watching this, and you do have an autistic child, I am sure that you feel the same way, because it seems to be pretty much universal that every parent of an autistic child, or even any autistic adult, has a really hard time finding any sort of resources or information at the very beginning and honestly throughout life.
Right. I mean, there are books, and I mean, there are places where you are able to get the information, but as soon as you hit the ground running that this might even be on your radar, there's not enough time in the world to track down all the information, or, I mean, you'd go crazy trying to read all the information, trying to get ready for what is next. So we're hoping to try and alleviate some of the late night research and kind of put together a path of sorts that you can kind of go
Navigate.
along. Yeah, just to make it a little easier.
We're trying to do a little bit of the legwork for you guys. One of the things that we do touch on at some point as well is how at the very beginning, I'm not sure if you guys can relate to this, but at least for me, I am like a super knowledge hungry person. So at the very beginning, when we found out our child was autistic, I just dove into researching autism. I looked all over the internet. I talked to people. Like, I wanted to know anything and everything there was. And although that's really helpful and beneficial, it can get to the point where it's a little bit unhealthy at the beginning, because you kind of get sucked into this like black hole of information overload, and that can affect your emotions. That can affect like your outlook on things, because as you guys know, the internet is not necessarily always reliable, and the information you get is not always the happiest information. So I wanted to find a way that we could get the most relevant, important information out there in kind of like a healthy, digestible format.
Right.
And we wanted to piece it all together in a way that would bring you from the very beginning. So right at the beginning, where you just suspect that your child may be autistic. Our first episode after we give our backstory, episode 1, is actually about like red flags, like if you just suspect your child may be autistic, and starting from there. And then the podcast gradually goes through the entire process from there. So we go to...
I think the most recent episode that we released was actually diagnosis day, or preparing.
So we preparing for diagnosis day. Yeah, so we go from red flags, then preparing for diagnosis day. Then we actually go through the details of diagnosis day. So sneak peek for you guys, the next episode after preparing for diagnosis day is actually going to be an episode full of what to expect on diagnosis day. And because our kids were diagnosed right before and during COVID, we have experience with both the virtual diagnosis process as well as the in-person diagnosis process. So we were able to put together a pretty good compare and contrast episode about that, as well as an accompanying article. So if you guys have any questions and you're going through that process and you want to know, is it worth it doing online versus in person?
Right. And I think other things that we, try to focus on along the journey is we touch on the different types of resources out there. So the different types of therapies, navigating the insurance, which can be fun and challenging, all in the same. And then we also try and put just real experiences that we've experienced with the girls and how we've kind of gone about managing them. And then we touch on a little bit about finances, because autism and getting everything situated can be a bit pricey. But overall, we wanted to try and just build a collective resource that parents can reach out and get answers if we're able to answer them, or at least put them in the right direction where they can get the answers from someone else.
Yeah, and the theme for season 1 is actually it's called From Weathering the Storm to Embracing Autism. And Courtney, I see your comment there that you're currently going down that black hole. I totally get you. That's why we're providing this, to probably help you hopefully navigate that so you don't get overwhelmed. But the theme, that actually goes nicely, because the theme for this first season is called From Weathering the Storm to Embracing Autism. And the reason we named it that is because initially it feels like it's overwhelming, and you do feel like you're just trying to stay afloat and you're weathering the storm.
Right.
And what we wanted to do is help people get to a place where they can go through that storm, navigate the storm, and come back on the other side and look back and be like, oh, hey, I did it. I'm okay. And then once you get to that spot, you have the strength and the courage to then become like the better parent for your child, the healthier parent, because you can't really parent effectively when you are stressed, overwhelmed, depressed, like when you're sleep deprived, right, anxious, like all these things need to be dealt with. So we basically just want to show you guys like the light at the end of the tunnel, and the fact that there is a way to do it. So we do it in bite-sized chunks. intentionally not to overwhelm you guys, but to give things to you in kind of like a spoon-fed, easy to digest way.
I suppose also our goal is also to kind of change the perspective that not everything is dark and gloomy. I mean, there are ways to simply modify how you perceive the world. And I think once we started to realize how our daughters were perceiving things, and we were able to kind of get on their level and engage with them and be able to kind of break that barrier with the communication, I think that's when everything kind of started opening up, and we were finally able to start communicating with our girls for the first time. I mean, not saying that as soon as it happened, all communication is easy. I mean, our youngest, would still probably be considered nonverbal.
Probably. I think she's still nonverbal.
And we still rely on, basic sign language to kind of communicate with her. Not everything it's like a light bulb, but at least it starts to become a change of perspective where you start to see kind of the light at the end of the tunnel and kind of changes. Sorry.
That makes sense. No, that makes sense. Yeah, because the other thing that we were thinking about is that when it comes to autism, there's so many aspects of it, because there's the medical aspect of it. And that in itself is overwhelming. It's like, okay, what is autism? Only 1% to 2% of people have this, so there's not a lot of information, not a lot of people know. So the medical science is limited, so we want to kind of touch base a little bit on that. And then we also want to know about, like, okay, how does this impact you as a parent? How does this impact your child? How does this impact the family dynamic? So we want to delve into things like that. And we specifically called this podcast Embracing Autism because we don't like necessarily the idea of autism being a stigma, so we don't want it to be stigmatized. And so what we're trying to do is change the perception of autism and try to get people to start learning to not just have awareness or even acceptance, but embracing of autism spectrum disorder and autistic individuals, because at the end of the day, they're just people like everyone else, and everyone deserves that respect and love. So it's really a main goal.
Don't think of it as a battle. Think of it as you're working as a team to reach a common goal. And we talk about that multiple times. I think one of the big things that comes to mind is if your child is having a meltdown, how to work with them to, if it's a transition that they're struggling with, finding an easy solution to make the transition a little bit more bearable.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the other things that we had run into was the fact that whenever we did actually go online and started trying to look into other communications or communities, and interact with other people, there was kind of like a bunch of different perspectives from the parents. And there was the parents that were very much so like, I absolutely love my child for who they are, and like, that's great, and I love to see that. But there were also the parents that were kind of like horrified at what their child is and couldn't deal with it and completely overwhelmed. And while I do want to empathize with that because it is initially overwhelming, I do want to try to give people like that encouragement and a way to get out of that darkness, because at the end of the day, it's your child. Autism doesn't change that this is your child, doesn't change that they are a wonderful, lovable person, So we wanted to make sure that we could find a way to try to give parents the tools that they need as best as possible from our personal experience and what's worked with us to ease that relationship, because we don't want to see any child, feel neglected, and we don't want to see any parent get to the point where they feel like they have no choice but to resent their child, which is not all parents by any means, but I have seen some cases of that. And if I can help in any way, I want to help. So that's another reason we did this.
So it's kind of the breakdown for, I guess, season one. We kind of walk through the experience of the diagnosis, getting the different therapies that are available, and then touching on various things like finances and insurance, and then kind of wrapping it up. So what are you thinking for next season, beyond, in the future?
So we have already a couple seasons planned out for you guys. Woohoo! Season one's actually completely recorded, so those are going to be launching every Friday. And for season one, after we get through the whole diagnosis, we're going to dive into the different therapy types. So we'll have episodes describing occupational therapy, speech therapy, ABA, physical therapy. We'll have episodes dedicated to that. Like he said, we'll have episodes dedicated on financial resources, government resources, things like that, to help you on the financial end and how to get those things going. So we're basically trying to create kind of like a toolkit for you guys. And then beyond that, the seasons afterwards, we're going to start working on season 2, which is going to be on the sensory system and all things sensory. And we're just going to keep building on from there as much as we can.
Honestly, I think there's a lot to, talk about in each of these. We only kind of scratched the surface with some of these therapies. There's a lot to talk about.
There really is.
And we only have a short amount of time to kind of get through it. But we give I think a decent overview of kind of the main focus of each of those therapies, so you can get an idea of what it is and if that would be beneficial for your child.
Yeah. So I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but we are doing a live Q&A throughout this, so you can feel free to shoot any questions at us throughout this, and whoever enters questions in here, basically for every question that you enter, you'll have a name entered into a drawing that we're going to be doing, and the person whose name is drawn is going to have a sensory box mailed out to them for their autistic child. So go ahead and feel free to submit as many questions as you have, and we'll try to get through some of them. We also have some previously submitted questions, so we'll try to go through some of those as well.
Okay. Did you want me to start going through some of the questions that we've gotten?
Is that all we got for the podcast? I think it is, right?
Pretty much just
Yep.
a quick over. Okay.
Cool. So
Fantastic.
we do have a couple questions. Again, feel free to shoot some in the chat if you have any. We are keeping an eye on that. In the meantime, we do have some questions that were submitted in advance.
All right. So one of the questions that was submitted was one of the listeners or people who have contacted us had mentioned that they've heard about the controversy surrounded around ABA, and they were wondering if there's any type of alternative that would be on par with kind of the ABA
therapy.
Right.
So we hear this a lot. This is actually a really common question. For those of you watching, I'm not sure if you're aware, but ABA therapy is considered highly controversial. So there's people who advocate highly for it. There's people who advocate against it. We're kind of like in the middle where we're like, we can see both the benefits and the cons, so I can understand both sides. So if this person's asking what are some alternatives?
They're asking if there's something comparable.
So an alternative to ABA therapy, which is applied behavioral analysis, I believe, is actually called floor time therapy, and it's also referred to as the Hannon model. And this is something that we actually did ourselves. A lot of people haven't heard of it. We actually learned about it through our local public school system's infants and toddlers program. Our local public school system has parent training on the Hannon model / floor time. And so I was able to go through it was a couple weeks. I can't remember exactly how many, but it was a couple weeks parent training on how to do the floor time therapy at home. There are some floor time therapy locations as well, facilities that you can go to, but you can get parent training to do it yourself. It's actually a pretty easy learning curve, so it's easy to learn. And the reason why this is chosen as an alternative to ABA, I guess if you guys haven't heard, the reason there's controversy behind it. Yes, okay, so I see the comment. The reason there's controversy behind it, Courtney, is because ABA therapy is seen as kind of abusive. It definitely has abusive roots when it was created. Children used to get literally slapped or shocked and things like that to comply and appear to be normal children. But ABA therapy today is very different from that. It's not the same therapy that it used to be. So I definitely think that ABA therapy has come a long way. Personally, I can see aspects of ABA therapy that can be beneficial, right? So they teach your children communication by teaching them the language exchange system, the PEC system. They can teach them how to stop self-injurious behavior like headbanging or punching yourself or things like that. So I feel like in those cases where you have extreme behavior and you really need something to stop it, I feel like, that whole scenario of desperate times call for desperate measures? Yeah. So like in that sense, I would be like, okay, like I get it. So in that case, I can understand ABA. But a lot of the things that they do in ABA that are beneficial are actually things that are already being done in things like speech therapy and occupational therapy. So, for example, the PEC system, you can actually get that taught to your child through a speech therapist. So we personally have opted out of ABA therapy, mostly because they tend to be anywhere between 20 to 40 hours of a commitment per week. And I personally just feel like that's way too much time commitment for a child.
I was going to say for a 2-year-old, I mean, you figure that's basically a part-time, full-time job. And the type of work would be, I mean, kind of repetitive as far as the tasks that they'd be working on.
Yeah.
I thought that would be a little bit much.
It does seem to be kind of like too much for children in the sense that it does seem like you have to kind of do a lot of work. There are some parents that report that for their kid, it really is more like play, right? So I feel like at the end of the day, the parent makes the best decision for the child. So whoever you are, if you're interested in ABA, it is controversial, right? You know your child best, and you know the therapist that you're going to best. Some therapists that don't have good training, they do end up being like abusive. I've seen it. I've seen they get really short-tempered and can't handle the child, or they'll have them redoing the task over and over and over and over, and the kid is visibly frustrated and crying, and they'll just keep doing it. So like that to me that's a bad therapist. So if in an ideal world it was ABA in a vacuum with a perfect therapist and you were able to observe, I would 100% say if you do ABA therapy, observe the child, like mandate that you can observe. And then you feel comfortable with what's going on in that, then like that's fine.
And I was going to say, and that works even outside of ABA. I mean, not all therapists are created equal. I mean, we had a speech therapist that we didn't appreciate or didn't think that it was working, so we searched for another one. Same thing with an occupational therapist. I think the very first one we went to, our daughter really wasn't clicking with her, so we looked for another one, and then she absolutely loved her occupational therapist. So I really think, I almost rely on your kid a little bit to kind of gauge.
Yes, definitely. Our kid told us through her behavior who she liked to see in therapists or in therapy. So like she had that occupational therapist that she would go to, and she would cry and cry and cry, and she wanted to be with me. So I pulled her out after a couple weeks, and I put her to another occupational therapist in another facility, and she loves that therapist. They're like BFFs. So let your child, like, gauge it by your child. Is your child coming home upset? Are they crying? Are they frustrated? Do they seem like their behavior is really changing in a not so good way? Monitor those things. And then the other thing about ABA is just make sure that whatever it is that the ABA therapist is doing, it's not to try to make your child appear normal. So things like forcing eye contact, forcing them to stop hand flapping or something like that when it's harmless. I feel like that hurts the child more than anything because they're trying to self-regulate their sensory system. And if you stop them from doing that, they're still going to feel the chaos. They just can't self-regulate. So if you have a therapist that doesn't do those things, then that's fine, right?
And then we have a question from Mark Longstaff.
Sorry, very long answer, but it's a big topic.
Mark Longstaff, he's basically asking, what can he do? Essentially, he doesn't have autistic children, but what can he do kind of for educational purposes to kind of embrace autistic children as far as any type of educational...
What to do to help kids. Yeah. So if you are a neurotypical parent, okay, so neurotypical is people who are considered to be quote unquote normal. I don't like that term, but it's the easiest way to explain it. Neurodiverse is anybody who doesn't fit in that realm. So that'd be autistic, or that would be, I guess it could be anything, dyslexic, ADHD, like all those things, right? So my advice for people who are neurotypical in terms of how to engage or learn to engage around autistic kids. I don't know, man. We're going to have to do this from phone. Let's see. Can y'all see us now? Invite people to appear. Oh, we can invite people in our live stream. That might be interesting. So, sorry guys, we're having technical difficulties. I don't know what's going on because
We still have internet.
yeah, our internet works, but for some reason
the video cut
the
out.
video cut out. I don't know if maybe we have a time limit. You guys might know. But we are live now. Do you want to see if you can share the live video here so that people can see it? Yeah, go ahead and just share this on the page.
As a teaser.
No.
Because we're like in the middle.
No, share it on the page so people can find us. Yeah, share this video. Yeah, you figure that out.
Okay.
Sorry, guys. Oh, look, they found us. There's 3 people. Hi. Okay, you guys found us. So we have no idea what happened. The internet is working and everything. I think Facebook just cut off the stream. Maybe it was too long. So let's see. If you guys could just re-enter your questions in this chat, because now I don't have access to the other chat.
We're working on Mark's question.
Oh, yes. So, sorry, Mark. Long-winded answer to your question. Basically, yes. So what you can do is essentially teach your child to accept and care for other children as if they were, the golden rule, as if how you would want to be treated regardless of their disability. And then some other things that you can do is try to maybe get them some books where the characters might have disabilities. There are some of those, and they're really cute. And you can teach them through books if they're very young. So if they're like toddlers or things like that, that's an easy one. Daniel Tiger actually has a new episode that is about Daniel going to school, and there's an autistic child. So that's actually a great episode, and it got me the feels. So I feel like that's definitely one. And if you do need books, Angela Stoneberger in the comments, she's your gal. She's got tons of good book suggestions. But yeah, books is one. TV shows is one. Just going out and hanging out with them, right?
Yeah, I'd say basically explaining kind of what the process is. So, an easy way to kind of explain some of the areas would be they have either are undersensitive or oversensitive to various
stimulus.
Right. So they might struggle with bright, or what we would say bright lights, where they don't want to be in bright lights. They might
struggle. Noises. That's a big one.
Noise is a big one. Also, as far as different types of textures, like both our daughters would tiptoe, and we had to work on them actually walking on both feet. So I think it's kind of for that, at least focus on the various components that are connected with autism to kind of make other kids aware of.
Yeah. And it looks like Angela's got some good book recommendations there. She says there's some Sesame Street books about autism. Yes, smells, Laura. Thank you for reminding me. There are kids who are sensitive to smells, and our kid, it's really the sounds, I feel like, for her. So that's the thing. Every autistic kid is different. So whatever you teach your kid, you're going to have to help them to understand, essentially, every kid is different. So you're going to have to just listen to your kid and try to empathize with them. Are they covering their ears? Honey, maybe their ears hurt. Maybe talk lower. Just like talk to them, not in like a disparaging way, but I'm assuming if they're a little kid, you call them honey.
And Laura, we see your message. Yes, our oldest daughter refuses to eat cheese and yogurt. But
yes.
But our youngest loves both, and they're both autistic, so both ends of the
Although
there.
I'm not sure if you mean sensitive as in a food sensitivity, like an allergy, because that is also something that's very common with autistic kiddos, is they tend to have a lot of different food allergies, gluten intolerance, things like that. So I'm assuming if you say she's sensitive to that, you probably mean she has some sort of like intolerance or something like that. That's my guess. I'm just going to assume so. I'll see.
And Angela had asked a question before we dropped offline. I believe it was something along the lines of the difference between a tantrum versus a meltdown, because she was saying her son, I believe, is 10, and sometimes she has a hard time telling the difference between the two.
That's a great question. So how to spot the difference between a tantrum and a meltdown. This is actually something that I talk to a lot of therapists about, and we basically learned that one of the things that you can take a look at is what is causing the behavior. What's the trigger? So if it's a sensory related trigger, so for example, did they start freaking out and having a tantrum because they were just hanging out with a bunch of kids and the kids were screaming in the playground, and then all of a sudden your child starts freaking out and crying and all this stuff? that seems like, obviously clearly a sensory related things. Is your child, however, having a meltdown because they didn't get something that they wanted? So for example, if your child comes up to you and says they want a hot dog for lunch and you're like, no, honey, you're going to have mac and cheese, and then they have the behavior, then that's probably more likely to be a tantrum. So the way that we kind of try to wheedle out the two is, does it seem to be triggered by something that they didn't get that they wanted, or something that didn't necessarily go their way? Or did it get triggered by either A, something you absolutely don't know, like you have no clue what triggered it, or did it get triggered by some sort of like, not just sensory thing, but it could be like a change of routine? Did they go somewhere new they're not used to? Did you buy them new clothes? Our kid had a huge meltdown during Christmas because we put up Christmas decorations. So things like that. It is very...
And then for that one, I guess it would be kind of linked to a bunch of different sensory overloads. It could have been sounds, too many people talking at one time, the wrapping paper, different gifts, exposure to new people. We had family visiting, and then just kind of the kind of excitement just all around probably was too much for her to manage. So needless to say, we've modified how we do Christmas, where we slowly introduce gifts over a period of, I think, a couple days.
Yeah, so, we do like the 20 days of Christmas now.
Right.
But I see, Angela, your comment too. Discipline is very hard because I have to think if he can really help it or not. I find myself having to remind myself. I lost the rest of it, but I think I get what you're going with there. Yeah, sometimes it is hard to distinguish between the two. Like, is it a tantrum? Is it a meltdown? Should I react like more empathetically, or should I discipline him like I would like a typical child? And I think it is hard to do on the spot. It's honestly easier to do in retrospect, like after the fact. But during the heat of the moment, I would judge based off of like your child's age, and not just their physical age, but whatever their cognitive age is, because that varies from autistic child to autistic child, and try to think of like, are they reacting in an appropriate way to what happened? Like, is their reaction equal to what the problem is for a kid that age? So we know kids overreact regardless, right? But are they reacting at that level, or are they like way overblown, in which case it might be more meltdown territory?
And I still run into the problem as far as the meltdown tantrum breakdown. If our daughter is overtired, sometimes I think that is kind of a meltdown, when in reality it's just she skipped a nap. And so I mean, sometimes it's hard to distinguish, but then as soon as you put her in her room and she passes out in about 5 minutes, then it wasn't a meltdown, it was just you were too tired.
That's why it also depends on the kid's age. So like if they're still in napping territory, then it could just be they're overtired sometimes. But I think you have older kids, so that's why I think and then that's the other thing, depending on their age, they might be hitting that pubescent period where the hormones kick in, and then you're just going to start getting sass too. It's just, part of parenting. But yeah, that's a good question. What else do we got here? We got a couple more, sorry.
Let's see.
And we've got just like a handful of minutes left here. So if you guys have any more questions, go ahead and throw them in the comments. We're going to stick around for another 8 minutes, and then we're going to sign off.
Sure. So one is my son is headbanging. Do you have any recommendations?
Ooh, headbanging. So I don't know if any of you guys have had a child who headbangs. We did. Our child was a headbanger. And for people who don't know what that is, headbanging is what it sounds like. They bang their head on things. Usually it's not soft things. So our kid was hitting her head on the crib rails, and then she started doing it on the back of the wall as well. And what we learned with occupational therapy is that it's actually like a sensory seeking behavior, or at least it was for our kid. Again, always refer to your therapist. And so because what happened is during the day, she's high sensory seeker. She would spin, climb, jump, all these things. So then at night, when it's time to settle down, she still needed that sensory input, but couldn't get it anymore because she was in her crib. So that's where the headbanging behavior was kind of coming out. So our therapist recommended adjusting that.
Right. So thankfully, she was about the age that we were about to take her out of the crib anyway, so we were able to put her in a toddler bed, or kind of equivalent to that. Okay. And then we were able to have sensory activities for her to do. So we have a small horse that's kind of like a ball that she's able to bounce on. She has a rocking chair that she can kind of sit and rock back and forth. And we noticed that for the most part, I would say that as soon as we removed the crib and then gave her another outlet to seek that same sensory feedback, I believe that greatly reduced her headbanging. I haven't seen much of that in quite some time.
Yeah, so Laura, I see your comment. It says our daughter started slapping herself during COVID. Our child's behavior also started during COVID, and we talked to a lot of the therapists and a lot of the developmental pediatricians, and they said that overall they saw these behaviors spike over COVID because our kiddos got such a major change of routine. So it makes sense that they were anxious, and this is just how a lot of them were kind of letting it out. But one of the things that was recommended for us is to try to give back sensory input to that child. So try to zone in on when she's doing the slapping behavior, if there is a specific time and day or location that she prefers to do it, just because it makes it easier to target it. And then once if there's a pattern, try to target during those patterns to do like a preventative measure. If there is no pattern, try to give her sensory feedback in advance. So maybe give her snug fitting clothing was a recommendation. Another recommendation we got from an OT is trying to put like a beanie on her head because she was headbanging. So whatever she is slapping, I'm not sure if it's leg, arm, whatever it is, try to put some tight-fitting clothes, maybe some long, tight-fitting socks. They make those sensory sock blankets that they can go in.
Also weighted blankets as well.
Yeah, weighted blankets and vests. Compression vests are other ideas.
Yeah, compression vests are great.
Yeah.
It's kind of a game changer.
The canoe too.
Oh, I forgot. You're right. The canoe. As far as kind of a blow-up canoe that she's able to crawl into and kind of rock back and forth. So she'll do that on her own. I mean, she's only 2, but she'll get in her little canoe, and either we can kind of move it back and forth, or she will. And she actually felt so comfortable in it, she actually fell asleep. So it definitely gives her kind of the motion-seeking feedback. Or, I mean, if you're able to support a swing in your house or outside of your house, depending on where you're living and the situation there, I think that is kind of a big help. I know for our daughter, she just discovered hammocks, and
oh my gosh, she's so into them.
So she definitely wants to just lie in the hammock and go back and forth all day. So there's definitely different things to look into for kind of the motion-seeking avenue.
And I see Laura chatting in here. So you said her rocking is a lot more pronounced, that she slaps her face, and that she is 6 years old. I'm not sure if she is verbal or not verbal, but if she has some sort of communication, I'm not sure if you're able at that age with her to understand, like if she's able to communicate to you what her needs are, because that would be like the first go-to, but if she can't communicate it, then that's something else. But yeah, like he mentioned, so she loves her hammock. So things like that, a hammock, they actually have the inflatable canoe was something that our kid really liked because you can squeeze them in and then rock it. So as you rock it, they're getting double the feedback because they're getting the compression of the inflatable canoe, but they're also getting the motion of it rocking back and forth. So that's something that she really loves. So she's got verbal communication. Okay, so then maybe you can verbally try to redirect the behavior from her then. So that was another thing that OT taught us is redirection of behavior. So whenever we see her seeking some sort of sensory input, and if we think that sensory input is harmful or it's just inappropriate at the time, try to redirect her to something that is appropriate or healthy. So if they are doing like self-harm behavior, if they are doing something like that, redirect it to something more appropriate. So like headbanging, for example, I would say get a pillow, let them like headbang into the pillow.
In our daughter's case, she was scripting the same phrase of Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and apparently she started screaming, and she had never screamed. She was very quiet. I mean, for the most part, unless she's scripting that one scene, she's very quiet. But she'd just be screaming as loud as she can be. And her sister, who is very sensitive to loud noises, would start to cry and get very anxious whenever she was around her. So what we had to try and do, we actually got her a red Solo cup, and we were showing her if she's able to kind of scream into the cup, it still produces the sound, but it's muffled, where she's probably the only one that's really able to hear her scream, and it gives her that feedback. So we were able to introduce a workaround a little bit. We're still trying to address that problem whenever it surfaces, but it is something that we've kind of been trying to work on as well. Another way to try and address some of their concerns.
And Nikki, I did see your comment about the swing that we were talking about. So we talked about a couple of them. So I'm not sure if you were talking about the inflatable canoe that we were rocking back and forth, or did you mention like the actual swing for?
I just mentioned just the swing in general. There's several.
Yeah. So there's the swing that we have is I will post the details after this stream and I'll send it to you, but it is like a teardrop shaped swing that has an inflatable cushion on the bottom, and you can hang it outdoors or indoors if you have a swing frame. So I will get you that information.
Another type of swing that we've had recommendations for both physical therapy and occupational therapy would be the platform swing. Physical therapy, because it's working kind of strengthening core muscles, because our daughter has low muscle tone. And then physical therapy, I'm trying to think of what was the main focus for that one as far as the...
Low muscle tone.
Was it low muscle tone for both? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So awesome. Great, Nikki. So yeah, the inflatable canoe. Okay, I will send you a message with the inflatable canoe. There are a couple places you can get it, but I will send you a message after we're done. I gotcha. But yeah, the physical therapy was hypotonia is what our child had. So sorry, it looks like we are running on time here. So it's just about 8 o'clock. So what Matt is going to do here is he's going to spin the wheel of our winner, and we are going to take the names of everybody who commented in this live stream and the last live stream, because I know it got chopped up into two parts. So we're going to go ahead and spin the wheel, and whoever wins is going to get a sensory box for their kid. So go ahead and spin the wheel.
How do I spin it?
You click the button. There we go.
Okay.
All right, it's spinning. Let's see who's the winner.
Looks like Courtney.
Boom. Courtney.
Courtney, we will be getting your information after the live stream. We can send you a message. I'm sure you're already in the group.
Yeah, let me make sure that you're still in this chat. Courtney, like, if you are still here, send me a message just in case. Otherwise, I will hunt down your details. But awesome. Thank you guys so much. Let me just catch up with the chat and see if there's any other questions. Okay, so Laura Walsh wants us to send the information to her too. How about this, guys? Why don't I just post a post on AutismWish page with the items that we discussed of the swing and the inflatable canoe, and then you guys will be able to check it out there, because it seems like more than one person wants to do it. So yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm just looking through the comments, making sure there's nothing else that I missed. Sorry, it's a little bit delayed. Okay, so yep, all right, I got you guys covered. Awesome. And if that's all we really have.
Yep. We already released the first 3 episodes, and each episode is released on what Friday?
Yeah, we release episodes on every Friday from this point on. There's 3 episodes up. If you guys want to do us a huge favor, just go ahead and give us some ratings on the Apple Podcast. Go ahead and leave a review. The reviews help us get sponsors so that we can raise more funds to give kids on AutismWish. But that's pretty much all we got. So yep. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for listening to
Embracing Autism.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Have a good one.
Thanks for
Bye.
coming.